All right, good day. Hope that you're doing well. So now in this video, we're going to be looking into this exam questions that have to do with your trig functions. Now here we're given f of x, which is a sine graph. We're given g of x, which is a cos graph. And these are between the interval of negative 180 degrees to positive 180. Now they've given us the points, right, that these graphs are passing through. So which is 90 and 5. This is the turning point of this graph here. They've also let me just do this, and also the other one passes through 90 and 0, right? Now we also given a point of intersection, but let us see what the questions are requiring from us. So we need to determine the values of a and b to answer the first question. Now remember, if you look at your f of x function, this is given as a sine b x. Remember, what is A? A is your amplitude. Now, if I could zoom in here into the graph that we given, if you could look at the highest point, can you see that it will be at 5? So my value of A, which is my amplitude, would be 5. Sine of, now looking at the shape of this sine graph, this is a normal sine graph, right? So therefore, I don't think that this value that is going to multiply to x is going to be a different value than 1, right? So my value of b is going to be 1. But let me test that, right? So if my value of b is going to be 1, simply means that, remember, 1 multiplied by x, you're going to find x, right? So I have 5 sine x. So let me test that, right? So let me substitute my x at this f of x function, which is at 90, and I should find my y as 5 if this is correct, right? So 5 sine of 90, punching that into my calculator, I'm gonna get my y value as 5, meaning that this is correct, right? So how was I able to identify that this value here is 1? I looked at the shape and I saw that this is my normal sine graph shape, right? The only difference is just that it has a higher amplitude, right? Which is at 5, but otherwise it's still the very same shape, right? Now we have found the equation of this f of x function, right? So let me just quickly erase here. So the equation of this f of x function is at 5 sine of x, right? This is the equation of the f of x function. Now, let us look at what the other question is requiring from us. Now, 6.2, it says the graph of g of x. Now, let me write the graph of g of x equation that I'm given here. My g of x is given as, here, if you could look here at the top, my g of x is given as 4 cos of x. Now, what happened to this graph of g of x? It was shifted 30 units to the right and 2 units vertically downwards. So let me just write that here. So 30 units to the right and 2 units downwards. Now, let me just give you a bit of revision with regards to the movement of your graph. Remember, your horizontal movement, your left to right movement, it's gonna affect your x variable, right? And if you move to the right, you need to subtract on that x variable. If you move to the left, you would need to add on that x variable, all right? Now, what about your up and down movement? Your up and down movement is gonna affect the whole of your graph, right? If you move up, you're gonna add on your whole graph. If you move down, you're gonna subtract your whole graph, right? Now, let us try and make this to be applicable to the question that we have here. So we have 30 units to the right, and as mentioned, it's gonna affect our x values. So this would now be 4 cos of x, and to the right we said it's gonna minus, right? And how much are we gonna minus? We move in 30 units to the right, so this is gonna be minus 30. And if it's 2 units downwards, if it's down, I said we're gonna subtract the whole of the function, so this would be minus 2, right? So this would be my new equation if this g of x graph is shifted 30 units to the right and 2 units downwards. Now, what about 6.3? 6.3, calculate the minimum value of 8 divided by gx. Now, g of x in the interval of 60, negative 60 and 60. So let me highlight that interval. So this is my negative 60, this is my 60. Now remember, your minimum and your maximum values, they represent your turning points, right? So here, calculate the minimum value of g of x. Now let us look at the g of x function, right? So this is my g of x function here. And our focus is within this interval. Can you see that our turning point it's at point 4? I know this is not visible, but here it's 1, 2, 3, 4. So the turning point, right, which is my minimum value, it is at 4, right? My y value of my turning point, it is at 4, right? So where I see g of x, right? Remember your g of x is the same thing as y. I'm gonna substitute this minimum value, which is 4. So basically to answer this question, I would say 8 divided by 4, and this would be equals to 2, right? So minimum and maximum values, they do not necessarily represent your turning points, but they're related to your turning points, right? Every time whenever you're going to solve for your minimum and maximum value questions, you need to make reference to your turning points, right? Now, with that being said, let me just erase here so that we could do the other questions. Now, let us look at the 6.4 question that we given, right? If A, right, which is we're given A as a point of intersection, we need to determine the coordinates of B. Now, let me highlight point B on the graph that I'm given here. So this is my point B, which is my point of intersection, right? This is a point whereby the two graphs meet. A is also my other point of intersection, right? And now, if this is the case, they want me to determine the coordinates at B. Now, how would I go about doing that? Because this is a point whereby these two graphs meet. I'm gonna equate these two graphs, right? 5 sine of x equals 4 cos of x. Now, I have a sine, I have a cos, right? I can manipulate them to be a tan, right? Remember, every time whenever you have a sine and a cos, right, in these type of scenarios, you need to manipulate them to be tan, right, which is a single identity. Remember, tan is sine over cos. So what is it that I'm gonna do here? So I'm gonna divide both sides. So let me just do this. I'm gonna divide both sides by, let me just divide both sides by cos of x. As a result, sine over cos, I'm gonna get, the 5 is still there. Sine over cos, it's tan, right? And these two are gonna cancel out one another. I am left with 4, the other side. So I'm gonna divide both sides by 5 to get rid of this 5, which is multiplying here. So as a result, my tan of x, it's gonna be equals to 4 over 5. Now, I'm solving for my x. I'm gonna take my tan to the other side. So x is gonna be equals to the inverse of tan 4 over 5. So let me just punch this into my calculator. Now this is equals to 38,6, 38,66, right? Can you see that this is a different value from that, right? So basically my x value of my b is 38,66. Now, how would I find the corresponding y value? This b is present in both graphs. It's present in your So let me just do this. It's present in your sine graph. It's also present in your cos graph. So you can just substitute it in one of these equations to find your value of y. So in this instance, I'm going to substitute it into my sine graph, right? So 5 So doing so, substituting it into my sine graph, I'm gonna say, okay, to find my y, it will be 5 sine of 38,66, right? Remember on your calculator, do not round off up until you get to your final answer. So I'm just gonna say 5 sine answer, right? And I'm gonna get 3,12 as my y value, right? So basically my coordinates at B, 38,66, and my y value is 3,12. All right. Now we're done with this question. So let me quickly erase here on the side so that we could do the other questions as well. Now, with regards to 6.5, these type of questions, you need to make reference to your amplitude, right? Always, right? So you would need to make reference to your amplitude to answer those questions. Now, what do I exactly mean by that? So let us read what 6.5 is requiring from us. For what values of k would f of x equals to k have no real solutions? Now, let me highlight my f of x function here, right? So let me quickly highlight it here. This is my f of x function, right? Now, as mentioned, you need to make reference to your, let me just say your turning points. Now, can you see that the lowest value of your graph is at -5? The highest value of your graph with respect to y values, it's at +5. Do you see that? So basically, here, if my k values, they are less than -5, I'm gonna get an, so basically this would be undefined. I'm gonna get an error. There's no way my x values can be less than -5. Because why? The lowest point of my graph is at 5, right? The highest point of my graph is, the lowest point of my graph is at -5. The highest point of my graph, it is at +5, meaning that I can't get anything more than 5, right? So this graph would be undefined if my values of k, which represent my y values, they are less than -5, and if they are greater than 5, right? Basically, this is something that is not there on the graph. So basically, this would make my graph to be undefined, right? Hopefully that makes sense. Always make reference to your turning points, right? So let me just erase here. Now let us analyze the second question. So the second question, we're gonna answer these questions by interpreting the graph. Now, what exactly does this mean? 6.6.1. We need to show them, right? We need to show them where our f of x, right? So we have our f of x function. It's lower than our g of x. So basically, where our g of x graph, it's above our f of x. So now we need to make reference to answer these questions. We need to make reference to our point of intersection, right? The points where these two graphs meet. So let me just erase here. Now, okay, let me just do this. Now, let me highlight my g of x graph, right? Let me highlight my g of x graph in green, right? And this is my g of x graph in green. And remember, I need to show them, right, as mentioned here, where my g of x is above my f of x. Now, as you can see, this is the portion of the graph whereby my g of x is above my f of x. This portion right over here. Let's represent it in terms of x, right? Remember, I'm gonna put my x in the middle. The lowest value should be this side, the highest value should be this side. And as mentioned, you always make reference to your intersection points. Remember, this intersection point is at negative, so the x is at negative 141, comma 34. And then the x at b, we have found it as 38,66, right? Positive 38,66. So let me just erase here. 38,66. Now, to represent this middle part, right? This part whereby our graph, our g of x graph is above our f of x. Our x values, they should be greater than 141 or negative 141, right? So they should be greater than negative 141, and my x value should be less than 38,66. All right, and this would be my final answer to represent that portion whereby my g of x is above my f of x function, right? So let me erase here so that we could do the same for the last question. Now, for the last question, what is it that they want us to do? So they said, okay, use the graphs to determine the values of basically the inverse of your f of x. Now, let me just write down the original functions that I had here. My f of x function was equals to my sine, 5 sine x, and my g of x, this was equals to 4 cos x. Now, the inverse of your sine graph, it will be cos. Remember these two, they are co-functions, your sine and your cos. So the inverse of this, it will be cos, right? So it will be 5 cos of x. And they said this must be multiplied to your g of x. Now your g of x is 4 cos x. Now I want you to note something here. So you're going to get 20 cos squared x. Now whatever value that you're going to substitute here, it's always going to be a positive value. And why is that? It is because of you have a squared, right? Remember, if you have a squared, whatever value that you're going to substitute, you're always going to get a positive value, right? You could also try this out in your calculator. If you put, let's say, negative 90, but then you square it, your final answer would always be a positive value, right? So here, if this is the case, every time whenever we take the inverse and then we multiply it by the g of x, which is that, right? Because of the squared, the y values that we're gonna get, they're always gonna be greater than 0, right? Meaning that the values of x, so basically here, always our graph would be, we're gonna get the y values that are greater than 0, right? So in order to represent this, we would just take this interval as a whole, right? So the whole of my graph would be greater than 0, right? My y values for my whole graph would be greater than 0. So to represent those values of x, right? So I'm just say x from negative 180 to positive 180, right? Because y, as mentioned, always we're gonna get positive values whenever we have a squared, right? Now, that'll be all for this question. Remember, if ever you have any questions, always feel free to reach out. Thanks.